following webinar is the fourth in a series of 5 covering the topic of managing exposure to hand-arm vibration. In this fourth section, we will look at the hierarchy of controls and how to manage the risk using the hierarchy of controls, specifically for hand-arm vibration risk. On completion of this module, there should be a solid understanding of the hierarchy of controls as applied to hand-arm vibration, and an understanding of what type of action could be applied in terms of that hierarchy of controls. The hierarchy of controls is often shown by this pyramid, and the order of preference in addressing your controls in any risk is in the order from the top down, i.e. elimination first. So for elimination, understand the risk and whether or not the activity needs to be carried out at all and can it be changed. If elimination is not possible, then look for substitution. So that you've decided the activity is needed, is there another way of doing it? So when that comes to the world of vibration, think about lower vibration machines as a way of doing the same task. Engineering controls are where there is no alternative to the process, but the one that's being doing could be improved. So can there be a product modification or a process modification that can lower the risk? Administrative controls are when we see that the process cannot be changed, so we need to have ways of managing the risk, such as training, maintenance regimes, or limiting time when it comes to hand-arm vibration, which is equally achieved through job rotation. And the lowest control measure deemed appropriate, and in the case of hand-arm vibration, there is very little that can be done, is the use of PPE, or personal protective equipment. For hand-arm vibration, the use of gloves may well keep the hands warm, which is a good thing in terms of exposure to vibration, but they won't stop the vibration causing harm to the individual. So let's look at elimination with respect to hand-arm vibration. So looking for alternative ways in which the same job can be done. A rather obvious example when it comes to hand-arm vibration is to mechanize or to automate the work so that humans are not actually doing it. So that might be using an attachment on a breaker machine to break concrete rather than using a handheld breaker. When it comes to substitution, there quite often can be a lot more examples of what can be done for hand-arm vibration. But you do have to make sure that the equipment that's been chosen is suitable and can do the work efficiently. Lower vibration doesn't always mean lower risk if the lower vibration tool is quite inefficient at carrying out the task. So you need to select the lowest vibration tool, but it is still suitable and capable of doing the work efficiently. And always limit the use of high vibration tools wherever possible. The example shown here is in cutting large holes to use a diamond-tipped hole cutting drill, and that will, with a rotary action, and that would be preferred over a tungsten-tipped tool, which would require rotary and hammer action. In terms of substitution controls, the other important thing to consider is your purchasing policy. Ensure that your purchasing policy is in place. Discuss with suppliers how to achieve a solid purchasing policy with respect to vibration, and that should look at and consider how often tools should be replaced, so far as reasonably possible, to be able to do the work again efficiently with as low vibration as possible. And make sure that you compare vibration magnitude information from a number of different sources. The example showing here is if a breaker has anti-vibration handles, make sure that you know how the machine should be operated such that the benefit is gained from those anti-vibration handles. Engineering controls when it comes to hand-arm vibration include looking at things like workstations and how those workstations might minimize the load on employees, whether that be about the height or other parameters of the workstation. Also look at jiggings or fixtures that help suspend or hold either the tools or the equipment in such a manner that means that the person's vibration exposure is reduced, or for instance, that he doesn't have to grip the tool heavily. The more heavily a tool is gripped, the more vibration a person will be exposed to. The example given here is a heavy grinder being used at a workstation for repetitive work. Suspend the grinder using a counterbalance system, and that will greatly reduce the load on the operator's arm and the tightness of the grip that he needs when using that grinder. Tool maintenance is a very important administrative control when it comes to hand-arm vibration. Planned preventative maintenance will help ensure that a tool's vibration does not deteriorate with time because of the wear and tear of the tool. Equally well, consumable items should be replenished frequently to ensure that they do not increase the tool's vibration level again because of their degradation. And you should never use blunt or damaged equipment. The example given here is of the chainsaw. A chainsaw's teeth should be regularly sharpened in line with the manufacturer's recommendation as a way of ensuring that the chainsaw is both efficient, but also to reduce the vibration magnitude emitted by the tool and to ensure that the work is completed efficiently and quickly. Another common administrative control for hand-arm vibration is work schedules. It's common to limit the time that your employees are exposed to vibration, but it's important that you have the tools to ensure that they are able to do that effectively. Even before the limits that you give the individuals, make sure that you plan work to avoid any particular individuals being overexposed and to ensure that the work is shared between colleagues. Rotas generally should be introduced whenever you see tools that are being used frequently or continually. Work rotas between employees can at least share the risk between the group. An example is of that, it's basically organising your employees to work in teams so that they switch tasks within the team and balance that risk between all the members of the team. The last area of control in terms of the hierarchy control, personal protective equipment. For hand-arm vibration, unfortunately, protective equipment does not really exist in terms of protecting you from vibration. They may well keep the hands warm, which is an important thing. However, they cannot be relied on to prevent vibration transmitting through the glove and into the hand of the tool user. Information and training. It's important that anyone who is exposed to vibration receives appropriate training. The training should inform them about the sources of hand-arm vibration and how that vibration can be minimized in the choice or use of equipment. They should know whether they're at risk and how their risk levels compare with the action value and the limit value, and what actions you would expect for them to take given those levels of risk. It's also important that they know how to recognise and report the symptoms and are also willing to do so. They should see health surveillance as something that will help them remain at work, and they should know what your arrangements are for health surveillance. It's also important that they can see that you are being proactive and are working on how to take care of and minimise the risk that they may be exposed to. And it is also important, where you have established safer ways of using equipment, it's important that they receive the training on how to use tools in a manner that minimises their risk to vibration, such as not over gripping the tool. So having designed a series of control measures, it's important that you then assess whether or not your control measures have been effective in reducing the exposure to vibration to the levels that you desired. You should check regularly that your program of controls are being followed, and also talk regularly with managers and employees to see if they are seeing any problems with vibration continuing within the organisation despite the controls being put in place. And if you're in any way concerned that you might be approaching the exposure action value, then it may be worth considering a level of monitoring to know how much the reality of exposure is to your assessments. You can also ultimately check the results of your health surveillance and discuss with your health surveillance provider as to whether or not any employees are seeing their conditions worsen in any way. That is, however, a situation where someone's health has already started to deteriorate. So you would really want to make sure your controls were working before this were the case. The following diagram is another way of trying to appreciate how monitoring or collecting data on people's exposure can also be helpful to assessing your effectiveness of your controls. This is what might look like your classic control loop diagram. So you start by evaluating the risk. If there's no risk, there's no further action. There is a level of risk. You put in place some controls to manage that risk. You then want to evaluate the risk after the controls to establish if they are actually at a lower level than they were originally. And if you collect data in the same manner before and after the introduction of controls, then that will allow you to determine how to adjust the controls in order to improve those risks. Another way of representing that is to look at the traditional plan, do, check, act approach to control management. So with respect to hand-arm vibration, having done your initial risk assessments to establish what the level of exposure is likely to be for employees and what controls would be appropriate to manage that risk, and also whether or not occupational health screening is required. If you then go on to monitor the actual levels of exposure experienced by the individuals, then it will validate the risk assessment that you have just carried out, and also it will allow you to then check if your control measures have been effective and whether or not you actually need to do more and act further to put in place controls which will indeed reduce your risk as low as reasonably practical. So in summary, the Control of Vibration at Work Regulations 2005 focus on the elimination or the control of vibration exposure to as low as reasonably practicable. The most efficient and effective way of controlling exposure to hand-arm vibration is to look for new or alternative worth methods which will eliminate or reduce the vibration level. You should check regularly that the program of controls that you have put in place are actually being carried out. Talk regularly to all concerned about whether the situation under which your risk assessment and your control measures were developed have changed in any way. And remember, it's important to know that your control measures are effective. And monitoring is one way of checking that the effectiveness of your controls have given what you want in terms of the level of exposure that your employees are being exposed to. So that concludes this particular webinar. I'll remind you of the various reference material available from the HSE, which you can refer to expand your knowledge on the subject.